Now is the time for mystery and magic. It is Christmas Eve, and before I go off to the carol service in King's College, I wanted to just reflect briefly on something equally magical and mysterious, which I am increasingly intrigued by, and that is China and its civilization. This is perhaps partly prompted by recently writing a preface to the book of the designer Tim Yip, who did the artwork for Crouching Tiger and recently is working on the series on the birth of the gods. And it is extraordinary to watch that. You are taken into a deeper layer of the subconscious, which is so unfamiliar to anything I know from my traditions. And it reminds me, with a number of other fragments, of the short story by Borges about a man who starts to find an alternative world constituted in a number of encyclopedias, a Tertium Orbis, a third world. And that is what I'm discovering increasingly in my last years in China. I was always looking for that magical third world as a child and found it in various stories and children's stories, and then thought I'd lost it, except in poetry. But in anthropology, I discovered it in many accounts of tribes living in the Amazon jungle or Borneo, and then personally encountered it when I went to a shamanic society high up in the Himalayas in Nepal. But that was just a passing vision of something that seemed likely to fade away. But it was emphasized in my next great experience, which was going to Japan, which increasingly, as I investigated it and described it in my book on Japan Through the Looking Glass, is a magical world similar to that of Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass. But again, it seemed isolated and just that islands. Now going to China 19 times since 1996, and talking to my Chinese friends and watching films like those of Tim Yip's, I see that China is also a Tertium Orbis, but on a scale and dimensions far greater than anything I could have imagined, because we're talking about a parallel world which goes back and has retained elements of civilizations thousands of years ago. Early Chinese civilization, 6,000 years ago, has elements which seem mysteriously to have been preserved to this day. Behind the vast skyscrapers of Shenzhen or Shanghai and the amazing bullet trains and communications and sophistication of modern China, there lies this hidden, half-hidden world which has remained and not been shaken by the events of the last 100 years. And this is based on aspects which are so very different from my Greek and Christian Western tradition that it's very difficult for me to grasp hold of them. But I can see their rough shape, and I'll just mention one or two of them. The most obvious one is the language. No one can dispute the fact that the ancient picture language of China, pictographic or ideographic, each symbol being an idea or thought, is very ancient and very unusual. Nowhere else has it been preserved, and it is the earliest language writing systems that prevailed thousands of years all over the world before they were swept away by alphabetic languages. And it is mysterious because it combines the eye and the ear. It's half a word, half a painting, and the fact that it has been preserved is an indication that the thought systems of China and the art systems of China are totally different from mine. Turning to one of the most obvious of those thought systems, this is the ancient shamanic nature religion of China, known as Taoism, the Tao or Tao, known in Japan as Shinto. This is a way of looking at the world which makes no separations from heaven and earth, between nature and culture. Everything is fused together in one system. And this is, for example, why in the films of Tim Yip and others, and many Chinese stories and forms of art, the mysterious fairy-like fox spirit world impinges directly on human life, and they are intermingled. So Chinese thought and art is still that of an ancient, pre-separated world. It is a world which Karl Jaspers described as pre-axial, the separations, the turning of the axis which occurred right across, for example, the philosophies of the ancient Israelis or the Greeks, has not occurred in China. It had layers put on top of it, like Confucianism and Buddhism, but they've been shaped and changed into fitting with this much more powerful ancient philosophy, which continues to this day behind the surface. And it can be seen in the continuing art traditions and many other aspects of life. One of these is what I try and grasp hold of with the idea that China is a quantum civilization. Everything is both and, dead and alive, as Schrodinger's cat, whereas our system of thought for several thousand years has been binary, either or, the excluded middle, right and or left, heaven or earth, God or Satan, right or wrong, true or false. These binaries don't exist in China. Everything is contextual, fluctuating, liquid, moving between yin and yang and so on. And that's totally unfamiliar to me. And it's just part of a different philosophical, linguistic and artistic system, which extends also to other aspects of China. I'll just mention one or two. One is the social structure. I live in a basically individualistic civilization where I constitute the center of my universe and am separated off from other people. Chinese live in a group-based civilization where everyone only has the meaning in relation to other people. It's a relational or structural civilization where meaning does not lie in A or B, it's in the relation between A and B. And so the social structure, I suddenly realized, of China is the most ancient and simple form which the sociologist Durkheim described as mechanical solidarity. He found it in the simplest hunter-gatherer groups in Australia, where each element of the social structure is linked to the next one, as he used with a metaphor of an earthworm, which you can cut and it forms into two worms. So China is indestructible, short of a nuclear war, because everyone is linked to everyone else, and everything is about relationships. Another feature, and the last I'll mention in this very brief set of thoughts, is the political structure of power. Now, that is not as old, and yet maybe it is. What happened was that China, until about the 3rd century before the birth of Christ, was a fairly normal power structure. That is, a feudal system. You had the emperor, and then below him you had the kings of the north, the east, the west, and the south. You had dominions, you had the delegation of power down the structure as you have in feudalism. The lower people had to pay respect and homage and fealty to the emperor, and he protected them. That feudal system, which exists all over the West, and it has shaped up even our current political system, was wiped away by the first unifier of China, the first Qin emperor in 221 BC. He instituted, and it was expanded, a totally original and new and different bureaucratic centralization, whereby the people who ran the country were not powerful lords or gentry. They were bureaucrats. They had earned their place through the complex system of examinations. It was the first meritocracy based on merit, intellectual merit, and that system, which has held China together for the subsequent 2,000 years, despite a number of breaks and attacks, is unique in the world, and it fuses China into this vast civilization, about a fifth of mankind, larger than Western Europe and Eastern Europe and parts of Russia and Turkey put together. And it would not have been held together by feudalism, which constantly breaks apart, but this political system and this unique language, Mandarin, and this unique ideology all make China into one great mysterious world, which I first encountered, I think, as I remember it, the age of 9 or 10, when I learnt one of my favourite poems by Coleridge, Kubla Khan. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Alph, the sacred river, ran through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea, and so on. So, just a few thoughts for Christmas: magic, mystery, and a civilization which is extraordinary and now very important to understand, though difficult for me and from the West, because it is based on such different principles. Thank you.